Okay. So we talked about this, and I don't think we did, but maybe we did, so I'll do it quickly, and then we'll move to the next point. So he says, if you look at verse 14 on page 299, or on the screen, it would be right here. So no, that's chapter 3. Let's go to chapter 2. That it was known. New, correct. That's the pshat. That's the straightforward meaning. Rashi adds another interpretation from the Medrash. Show, right? I think we mentioned this. I'll do it very quickly. If I said this and you remember, just let me know. I don't remember if I said it last week or 15 years ago when we said it last time. 2 weeks ago or 15 years ago when we said it last time. So that's the okay, so that's verse 14. And he retorted. In other words, Moses sees one Jew hitting another Jew, and Moshe, as is his custom, he interferes. He doesn't say it's not my business. He gets involved always. That's his consistent pattern. And then he says, why are you hitting your friend? Russia, wicked one, why are you hitting your friend? And the guy retorts as follows. Verse 14, he replied, who appointed you as a dignitary, a ruler, and a judge over us? Do you propose to murder me as you murdered the Egyptian? Moses was frightened and thought, indeed, the matter is known. Right? And that's why eventually Pharaoh hears about it in verse 15. And in verse 6, and in verse 15, Moses flees. But in verse 14, it says, the matter is known. What is the matter? So the simple interpretation says Rashi. I'm going to the third Rashi on the screen over here. Rashi says, let's see if it's in the art scroll. Yeah, it's in the 14 where it says 14 on the left side, left column under the line. But I'll read it from Rashi here in the art scroll. They rewrite it. Says Rashi, to be interpreted according to its apparent meaning the pshat. The matter is known. What is known? That it was known that he had slain the Egyptian. Its midrashic interpretation, however, is the matter I was wondering about, i.e., why the Israelites are considered more sinful than all the 70 nations of the world to be subjugated with backbreaking labor has become known to me. Indeed, I see that they deserve it. This is a very harsh Rashi quoting from the Medrash. And I think I did talk about it, so we'll do it quickly. He says like this. He says, I had no idea. Moshe says, I'm wondering why the Jewish people are suffering so much. Now I know. Why do I know? I know because now the Jewish people are, because they slander, because they talk negative against each other. That's why that's why they're worthy of the slavery. We talked about this because I remember we looked at the previous Rashi and it says Dal Torin, and I said that I don't know what language it is for slander, and I asked my good friend Shmulik, and he said it was Greek. That's what he said. So in any case, we talked about this, I think. So the question is, so that's what Rashi says. So in other words, two things. The matter is known. What has known? What is known? Number one, what is known is one possibility is known. Now everyone knows that I killed the Egyptian. Now I am in trouble. That's matter number one. That's a simple interpretation. The deeper interpretation of the Medrash, I know why the Jewish people are worthy of this punishment. So that's Medrash. So we have the Pshat, simple meaning. We have the Medrash. We have also what I said last time, the Rebbe's interpretation of the Medrash. And that is, the question is, why is that the worst sin? In other words, the Jewish people at that point who had other sins as well. The Medrash says that the Jewish people served idols. Serving idols is the worst sin. So Moshe sees the Jewish people serving idols. He doesn't think that's a reason for the subjugation, for the slavery. But the fact that they slander each other, he says, oh, that is, now I know why they're here. And as Rashi is going to say also, in verse 14, where it says he feared, I think I mentioned this last time as well, he feared because maybe now they're not worthy of redemption. Vayira Moshe, same idea. According to the simple meaning in the previous Rashi, Moses became frightened, to be explained according to the simple meaning. He was afraid that people heard about it. Midrashically, it is interpreted to mean that he was worried because he saw in Israel wicked men, i.e. informers. He said, since this is so, perhaps they, the Israelites, do not deserve to be redeemed from slavery. That comes from the Tanchuma Shemot Rabbah. Again, so Moshe says the matter has been known. The matter is that now I know why the Jewish people are suffering. And the fear is that now maybe the Jewish people are not worthy of redemption. And we mentioned the Rebbe's question, which is they had other sins as well. And the answer is as follows. The answer is, which you also mentioned, so I'll do a brief. The answer is that other sins do not undermine the idea of the Jewish people as a nation. And God's promise to the Jewish nation is he's going to bring them out of Egypt. But if there's infighting, then Moshe says, maybe we're not a nation. Maybe we're not united. And if we're not united, we're not a nation. If we're not a nation, there's nothing for the blessing, for the divine promise to rest upon, right? The divine promise is the nation of Israel, our God will bring back the nation to Israel. But if there's no nation, then there's no promise. Then there's nothing for the promise to be fulfilled. So Moshe sees a collection of people who he feels are informing upon each other or speaking against each other. He doesn't see the cohesiveness of a nation, and he says that's the threat. And that is a threat. The answer is, like I said, that Rebbe points out, maybe now the matter is known, maybe the slavery is supposed to bring them together. So maybe that's the reason why they're enslaved. Sometimes when you have an external threat, it actually brings people together, and that would make them worthy for the redemption. But the point, the takeaway of all this is that the greatest threat to the Jewish people is not necessarily a sin, but it's the infighting or the separation between the people. And that was the threat. And Moshe says maybe that's actually the purpose of the suffering, is to create that cohesiveness. Sometimes, unfortunately, we need an external threat. Go ahead, Mark, please.
This goes along with the idea. It says he looked and there was no man. There clearly was a Jew, because the Jew found out.
Right.
So no man means there was no mensch. There was no one who could stand up as a man.
Yes.
But so clearly it was the Jews who are turning against him.
Right. Yeah. Yesterday, the speaker yesterday said twice, both at night and at day. And it was also the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 2. Last week we read it in the place, in a place where there's no man, try to be a man. Right? So Moshe, indeed. So yes, the Jewish people are not. The fact, in other words, what Mark is saying is the fact that Moshe is the only one to stand up, whereas everybody else means everybody's worried about their own pain. No one's standing up for the other person.
But just to push back on that,
yeah,
it's kind of easy for Moshe to have this point of view because he's a palace person. He's not living in not living in the bunk in Auschwitz.
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
viewing from the outside.
Yeah, but you see, he did risk his well-being. He had to run away, and Pharaoh wants to kill him. Medrash says Pharaoh tried to kill him, and he was saved. So depending on when exactly he escaped, but he certainly knew that it's dangerous, and he certainly had to look at each way. Right? He wasn't a hero. He wasn't trying to get into the New York Times. He was trying to do it in a way that nobody should find out about it. I guess I said something wrong, right? This must be I said something wrong. Yeah. Okay. So that's that's very important that you can't overemphasize that for our people, the greatest danger is that we don't see each other. You see each other as one people, and that could be the greatest threat. Okay, we discussed that. Go ahead.
Another point is so the Jewish people are suffering very, very much here, right?
Yeah.
But every people slanders each other. It's not just the Jewish people who have lack of cohesion and self-criticism and scathing and illiberal thoughts.
But I think that especially when we are threatened, then the human nature is to stick to, that's not the human nature. I would say that there is a human response that when we're threatened from an outside source, then you come together. And when you come together, that's the salvation. There could be salvation if we unite, right? If each person, if the difficulty, the challenge brings us together, then we could survive. If it doesn't bring us together, then there's no chance of survival. And that's what Moshe is afraid of. And then Moshe says, maybe we have to be here longer because to create that cohesiveness. Maybe we have not hit rock bottom. That's what he says. Maybe that's why we were punished. So the simple interpretation of the Rashi, according to the Medrash, is that it's just negative. We're bad people. We slander each other, so we're being punished. But the Hasidic interpretation is no, we don't have that cohesiveness. Maybe that's why we have to be in Egypt to bring us together. Because sometimes the external threat serves as a as a glue to hold the people together. So you can read it more in a positive light, if you see what I'm saying. But yes, we're not the only people who can't get along, but especially in a time where we need the Hashem's we need to be saved. So on a physical level, you have to have cohesion. Right, the second temple falls because of the infighting. It's not a spiritual thing; it's a very literal thing. The people could not. The people were fighting with each other. So how could they? So when Rome was at the gates, they're fighting with each other. So there's no way you're going to survive even on a physical level. Certainly, on a for spiritual protection, you need the unity. But also, Moshe is saying from the promise of Hashem, from Hashem's perspective, Hashem says He's going to save the children of Israel, the people of Israel. There's no people of Israel. Where's the peoplehood? Where's the unity? We're not one people. Right? That's a very big danger for a country. Either the United States now is polarized. You go to Israel, you open up the newspaper, you say, it's a serious question. Are we one people? I think we are, but a lot of people, but a lot of people benefit from portraying it that we're not, right? So that's a very big danger from a physical level and spiritual level. And we've seen that play out in the last year, unfortunately. Okay, enough current events, but you study Torah. Torah is current events. What am I going to do? Okay, what was the last point I wanted to say is that Moshe feared. Okay, so let's think about Moshe's fear, and there's a very beautiful interpretation from the Rebbe on this, and that is subtlety. It says Moshe feared. So according to the simple interpretation, we have the Rashi's second interpretation, which is he feared maybe they're not going to be worthy of redemption. But the simple interpretation, Rashi says, is Kamashma, he feared. He feared, and he said the matter is no. Now, the question is, why do I have to know that Moshe feared? Why is that relevant to know? Now, you could say, well, that's moving the plot ahead. It's telling us that Moshe feared, and that's why he escapes. But that's not what happens. If you look at the verses, look at verse 14 and then 15, and we'll see what happens. So verse 14 reads, he replied, who appointed you as a dignitary, a ruler, or a judge over us? Do you propose to murder us as you murdered the Egyptian? Moses was frightened, and he thought, indeed, the matter was known. And what happened? Nothing. If he ran away to Midian now, that would make sense. Moshe was afraid, and the fear motivated him to go to Midian. That's not what it says. Then you have verse 15. Pharaoh heard about this matter, and he sought to kill Moses. So Moses fled from before Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian. He sat by the well. In other words, when did Moshe run away? Not when he was afraid. He ran away after Pharaoh heard. It could have been after a day. It could have been after a week. And then it says that actually the wording is, he sought to kill Moses, not to catch. So the Medrash says he actually tried to kill him. In other words, it wasn't just he tried to find him. He actually tried to kill him, and then he was saved. So without getting into that right now, why do I care that? Why is it important to know that Moshe feared? The fear did not motivate anything. The fear did not motivate him fleeing to Midian. He was afraid. Doesn't mean he didn't. It doesn't mean he did anything. He only ran away when Pharaoh tried to kill him. So why does the Torah have to tell us that he feared? So this brings us to a general question. Go ahead.
Maybe another way of looking at fear is he's in shock.
Yeah, that's more the Medrash. He's shocked about the state of the Jewish people. Yeah, I would say that's the Medrash. Yeah, so according to the Medrash, this question doesn't begin. But according to the Pshat, if it's the simple Pshat, simple meaning, Moshe is afraid because he heard, oh, people know that I killed the Egyptian. Now I'm in trouble. But why do you have to know his inner feelings? We don't hear about exactly how Moshe felt every moment. It doesn't advance the plot, because if it would say he feared and he fled, that makes sense. The fleeing is explaining, the fear explains why he fled. But he did not flee because of the fear. Clearly, there's another whole story. Pharaoh heard, Pharaoh tried to kill Moses, so Moses ran away. In other words, even if he wasn't afraid, imagine he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid. Pharaoh heard, Pharaoh tried to kill him, so he ran away. But he wasn't afraid when it became known. You see what I'm saying? When it became known, he wasn't afraid. Later on, Pharaoh heard it, so he ran away. Pharaoh tried to kill him. So what is the Vayira Moshe? Why did Moshe have to fear? So why does the Torah tell us that Moshe feared? So there's really two ways of learning the concept of fear in the Torah when you talk about the great sages who fear. For example, great people. For example, Jacob. So Jacob has this whole story where Hashem promises him he's going to bring him back to Israel when he runs away from his brother. And then when he comes back and he hears that Esav is coming with 400 men, so the Torah says Jacob was frightened and he prayed. And the Medrash says, what does it mean? How come Jacob is afraid? Didn't God promise him that he will be with him? And this is a big question. It's not only here, it's other places also, but Jacob is a big place. Jacob is the first time where this thing comes up. And basically there's two ways the Medrash deals with it. In other words, there's two general perspectives. One general perspective is there's nothing wrong with fear. Even if God promises Jacob that I'm going to be with you, the fear is not a lack of faith. Why not? God promised everything's going to be okay. So the answer is, there's different answers, but the main answer is maybe Jacob says, maybe I sinned. Maybe I'm unworthy. In other words, God promised, but it doesn't mean I can't sin and be unworthy of the fulfillment of the promise. That's one way of explaining Jacob's fear, or any righteous person's fear. So why are they afraid? It's not because they lack faith in God. It's because they say, maybe I'm unworthy. So in fact, the fear represents humility, which is a wonderful thing. That's one way to look at it. And then you could say, this is not a question. Jacob, Moshe is afraid because that's what people do. People fear, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a sign of humility. But then there's another interpretation of the Medrash, and the Medrash is a little bit surprising, but there's another interpretation of the Medrash. The Medrash says that the fact that Moshe was afraid was a problem, and it was a lack of faith. He shouldn't have been afraid. If he trusted, that would be a better scenario. And the way the Medrash puts it, the Medrash says that had he, if you look at the verses, verse 14 says, Moshe was afraid. He was frightened, and he thought, indeed, the matter is known. And then verse 15, Pharaoh heard about this matter and sought to kill Moses. So the Medrash says, had Moshe not been afraid, maybe Pharaoh would not have heard. In other words, the trust in Hashem, the trust would have protected him. The fact that the fact that he was afraid opened up the possibility or the eventuality that Pharaoh hears. So in other words, according to this interpretation of the Medrash, it's actually negative thing that he was afraid. And the reason why the Torah highlights it is to tell you when you're afraid, then the fear becomes self-fulfilling. Had you trusted in Hashem, everything would have been okay. So obviously that's a very high level of trust, but that's what the Medrash puts out. Then there's a beautiful commentary of the Rebbe on the Medrash, which we said in the past. I think I'll say it again. The question of trust is as follows. The question about trust is, what does it mean to trust in Hashem? What does it mean that I say I'm not afraid because I trust that Hashem will protect me? The question of I don't know if it's a theological question or the logical question about trust is, why would I assume Hashem will protect me? Right? I say, I have faith, everything's going to be fine. I'm going to go, I'm going to do what I need to do, and everything will be fine. I have faith. Why do you have faith? Hashem is going to protect you. How do you know Hashem is going to protect you? Where did he say he's going to protect you? Are you deserving of protection? Maybe maybe no. Maybe I'm undeserving of protection. So if I'm undeserving of, like the first interpretation of the Medrash is that righteous people are afraid because maybe they're not worthy. So the question is, why do I assume that Hashem will be with me and Hashem will protect me? Maybe I'm undeserving. This is a very powerful question. It's a very profound question because we always say, yeah, I'm supposed to have faith in Hashem. But what is this faith based on? Faith based on means I think Hashem, not only that he could save me, of course he could, we know that, he's all powerful, but that he will. Why would I assume he will? To assume he will, I have to believe that I'm I don't want to say perfect, but close to perfect, that I'm a good guy, but I'm not, I know maybe I'm not deserving. So that's a big question on faith in general. And the Hasidic interpretation of faith is very interesting. It's like, let's say, also based on the Medrash essentially says it. Let's say a person is undeserving. I'm not deserving that Hashem should protect me. But I have faith in Hashem that Hashem will protect me. Says the Medrash, the faith itself causes you to be protected. In other words, that makes you worthy. Right? Let's say I was unworthy. Hashem, there's no reason why Hashem should protect me. But if I have faith in Hashem, the faith itself is the mitzvah. So the faith itself is the reason why I should be protected. So that's the logic why I could have faith in any scenario, even if I think maybe I'm not deserving, because the faith itself makes me deserving. So if I have faith, like we said, the fear is a self-fulfilling prophecy, but the faith is self-fulfilling. Because if I have, not just psychologically, but also spiritually, the faith makes me deserving, and the faith makes me worthy of the divine protection. So that interpretation, we would say, that's why if a person lacks faith, then they're opening themselves up to the natural consequence of the fear. And in that way, the Medrash, you could read the story of Moshe as a cautionary tale. You could read it. One interpretation of the Medrash is that's the right thing to do, the sign of humility. The other interpretation of the Medrash is no, it's a cautionary tale. Look what happens, and the person doesn't have faith, even if someone as great as Moses. If you don't have faith, Pharaoh hears. If you would have faith, then God would protect. Why would God protect? Maybe I'm not deserving. You are deserving. Based on what? Based on the faith itself. And this explains the Hasidic saying of the third Chabad Rebbe. And the Rebbe would always quote it, which is, think good and it will be good. Trach gut sein gut in Yiddish. Think good and it will be good. The question is, why would you so assume so? Who says? Right? It's nice to have a positive attitude, but what is it based on? And the answer is, it's based on the faith itself. The faith itself is what elicits the blessing, because that makes me worthy. But I wasn't worthy. Before I had the faith, I wasn't worthy. Yeah, but the faith makes me worthy. So in that sense, that's the Medrash. Again, which way do you want to read this verse? There's two ways to read the verse. The Medrash gives you both interpretations. You pick the one you like. But the concept, the second interpretation of the Medrash, teaches us something in general about faith in general, which is the faith itself makes me worthy. So I say, I self-doubt. I say, maybe I'm not worthy. But if you have faith, then you become worthy. So that's the logic. That's the logic of faith, I guess. Okay.
So just that maybe the Jews had faith, and then they had many, many years of slavery, and their faith got crushed.
Right. It's very interesting about the Jewish people in slavery. What's interesting is that we don't really hear them, at least the Torah doesn't tell us that they cry to Hashem, that they pray to Hashem, or they cry to Hashem. And that doesn't happen until later on in this chapter, chapter 2. And in verse 23. And what's interesting, 23, 24, 25 talks about the Jewish people groaning and screaming and shouting. We could talk about exactly what those expressions mean, or at least think about it. And then it says, oh, and God remembered the covenant. And then the story of Moses unfolds. In other words, in a way, nothing starts, the story does not start moving. The change doesn't happen until the people ask for it. Very interesting, because you would think Hashem made a promise. Hashem tells Abraham he is going to redeem his children after 400 years. So now it's incumbent upon Hashem to move the story, right? Hashem should step in and send Moshe. But it's interesting, Hashem does dispatch Moshe. But when does Hashem dispatch Moshe? Or at least how is it told in the story? It's told in the story only after the people cry. So in a way, I would say, indeed, we're not blaming the Jewish people, but indeed there was a lack of faith because there was despair. And the difference between, and there was despair, no one thought that it was possible to change the scenario. And then once you start crying, and once they start screaming, that is the first step of redemption, right? Because that means it's the assumption that this is unnatural, and this is not the way it should be.
So is there a connection in the Torah between the delay of Joseph
for a year,
his fathers,
right,
and the delay of beginning of slavery to the end of slavery, which was many, many years.
Right. So I'm not going to say it's a good question. I have to think about it. We have to analyze it. In a way, it could be there wasn't a delay, but the slavery, it was actually a shortening of time. We'll talk about that in a second. But because it was 400 years, the slavery was they were only in Egypt for 210 years. God tells Abraham 400 years. So what happened? So generally speaking, there's two answers. We talked about this many times. One answer is that no, it was really 400 years, but they were only in Egypt for 210. And the slavery itself was only like 80 something years. But the way that could be explained with the 400 years is because 400 years begins with the birth of Isaac. Because God tells Abraham, you should know that your descendants will be enslaved for 400 years. It doesn't really say 400 years. It says your descendants will be enslaved, and they'll be the descendants will be foreigners in a foreign land. Your descendants will be foreigners in a land that is not theirs. They will be enslaved. They will be pained 400 years. And then I'll take them out. Now the question is, what is the 400 years? You could say the slavery is 400 years, or you could say being a foreigner in a foreign land is 400 years, right? So that's not exactly clear. So if you're going to say it refers to being a foreigner in a foreign land, your seed will be a foreigner in a foreign land, you would say that the moment Isaac is born, that's when the clock starts because you have a seed. It's his child. Now you're going to say, was he in a foreign land? Well, Isaac didn't really have Isaac didn't really have the respect that Abraham had, and therefore he wasn't considered the leader of the region where he lived. He was a foreigner. He was a outsider, and this explains many things. That one of the most beautiful interpretations of the Kli Yakar that I always like to think about. I'm repeating it even though everyone heard it. Is that you look at Jacob's life. Whenever he's inside of Israel, he's suffering. Whenever he's outside of Israel, he prospers. It's a very strange phenomenon, right? Even when he comes back and he wants to settle, Joseph was taken away. Medrash makes the point. Jacob wanted to settle. Jacob wanted to settle in the land of the sojourners of his father. And as soon as that happens, the story of Joseph happens. So the Kli Yakar says like this. If Jacob settles in peace in Israel, that stops the clock of the 400 years being 400 years moving toward the Exodus from Egypt, because Jacob is not going to be in a foreign land. He's going to be in his own land, and he's settled. So therefore, when Jacob is outside of Israel, he's in a foreign land, the clock could be ticking. When he's in Israel, if he's settled and peaceful, then he's not in a foreign land. He's not a ger, he's not a foreigner, he's not someone who's unsettled. He'll be settled in the land. If he's settled in the land, that would stop the clock of the 400 years. So that's one way of reading it. The other way of reading it is that because of the intensity of the slavery, it actually shrunk. 400 years is supposed to be 400 years. But because the Egyptians were so cruel and the slavery was so intense, then the qualitative pain takes up for the amount of time. So in that sense, it was actually shrunk. The time was shrunk. So there's two interpretations, two general interpretations. Each one has details within it, exactly how it works. But these are the two general ways. So one way to think about it is the cry of the Jewish people shrunk it, right? Because that's why the Torah. So either way you read it, it's clear. I haven't seen this written clearly, but in my mind, it's pretty clear that nothing starts moving until the Jewish people cry. And now I think crying is an act of liberation. It's an act of faith. We talked about this other times also. But if you talk about speech, I don't want to jump all over the board. It's only Sunday morning, but there's a idea from the Arizal that he says Passover, Pesach. What does Pesach mean? Pesach means God leaps over. That's the conventional interpretation, right? Because God leaped over the Jewish homes. That's why it's called Pesach. Okay, to jump over, to leap over. The Arizal's interpretation is Pesach is two words, Pesach, not the mouth speaking. And the idea is that when a person is enslaved, the person can articulate, can't speak. When you're liberated, it means the speech is liberated. Before you can be liberated, your speech has to be liberated. You have to be able to articulate to yourself what you want and what you believe in, and a cry and a voice of liberation. Let my people go. It has to be verbalized first to yourself and then to other people. And Arizal points out that even when in the next verse we're going to read that the Jewish people cried, it doesn't say they spoke, because they're still enslaved, inner slavery. If you're inner slavery, you can't articulate, you can't speak. But I think that's so. Throughout the slavery, you have silence. The beginning of the slavery is the beginning of the redemption is the screaming, shouting. So it's not articulated, but crying in pain. That's the beginning. Later, you get to Pesach, you get to speech. If you look later in the Torah, the portion of Bo, it says, God says, I'm going to take you out of Egypt. Why? Leman tisaper, so you could relate the story to your children. The redemption is about relating. If you could tell the story, you're in control of the story, right? If you could tell, because story means meaning. Story means meaning. You could say, I had this difficulty and then I overcame, but that's because you can articulate and tell a story. If you're telling a story, you're putting the pain and suffering in a larger context, and the pain can actually be a way of growth. But to do that, you have to have inner redemption. So the point is that throughout how did we get to this? You said the Jewish people, did they have faith? Maybe the slavery affected their faith. Indeed, that's the point of slavery. Slavery is not just physical. Slavery begins with inner slavery, with the spiritual slavery, that there's no hope, and there's no hope, and there's no articulation. And again, you're not going to talk about redemption if you don't believe it's possible, and you're not going to ask God to save you if you don't believe it's possible. So slavery is the point where the speech is enslaved. And then it's a process before you can, how you can redeem that. And it begins at the end of this chapter where they groan and they scream. Like Jacob, they cried out. Cried out doesn't mean it's not articulated prayer, right? It's not prayer that was expressed with words, but it's a cry, and the cry is the beginning of the redemption, and the speech is the next level. Go ahead, Mark, please.
Aren't there unmuted? Yeah. Aren't there some people who would say that the idea of redemption through faith is a Christian idea and actually is not a Jewish concept?
Probably. I think that it's not. When I say faith, it means faith is too specific. What I'm saying is that the Jewish people cried first, and then Hashem responded. So it's not about faith so much, but it's more about what the Kabbalists would call itaruta delatata, an awakening from below. God waits for people to act before the redemption can come. Because we'll see this throughout the book, that ultimately redemption cannot be given to the people. People have to take it. We saw it already earlier in the book, actually, I just remembered. Right? We talked about the maidservants, the midwives who defy Pharaoh. And we said that's the beginning of the redemption. And you see it many times throughout the book. The main place where you see it is the Jewish people only ask to leave for 3 days. They never tell Pharaoh we want to leave. They never ask for permission to be free. They say we want to go for 3 days and come back. Why that is another story. We'll get to that. But the bottom line is, once the 3 days pass and they don't come back, they are defying the Pharaoh. And that's why Pharaoh dispatches his army to get them, and he catches them at the sea. And one interpretation is that the Jewish people, you can't, if you're free because Pharaoh told you to be free, if you're free because your oppressor told you to go free, you're not really free. Yesterday he told you to be in prison. Today he told you to go out of prison, right? That's not freedom. You're just doing exactly what he says. So if you're free because your oppressor allows you to be free, you're not free. Freedom means you have to defy the oppressor. And that's why there's no such thing as asking Pharaoh, make us free. Nobody can make you free. To be free, you have to defy. And you see that with the midwives. You see that with the daughter of Pharaoh. You see that Moshe certainly defies Pharaoh, but also the Jewish people. Every last Jew is defying Pharaoh when they leave and they don't come back and leave without permission. So I'm not talking about faith. Maybe other faiths have the idea of faith as the key. Here, it's not so clear the Jewish people state of the faith. If you read the story, as soon as Moshe comes, they believe. The Torah says, "Vayamein ha'am," they believed. And Moshe comes, they believe. Why not? Jews believe. But then what happens is, in the story, I hate to give you a spoiler alert, right? The only problem with studying the Bible is everyone knows the end of the story, so we don't really appreciate the twists and turns. But if you stop for a second to talk about the twists and turns, when Moshe goes to Pharaoh, Pharaoh increases the burden of slavery, and now the people lose faith. And now it says that the people, now it says that the people, what does it say? Now it says that the people, they didn't listen to Moshe because of difficult labor. So this faith is jumping back and forth. And then other people say that later they have to reestablish the faith. And in fact, okay, I could say defiance or faith, they really go together. The fact that they take the Paschal offering, which is the deity of the Egyptians, and they slaughter it. And not only do they slaughter it and eat it in the basements, but they put the blood on the doorposts. And not only did they cook it in the oven so nobody should hear about it, but they roast it. So now the whole Egypt could smell the barbecue. So you could say that's an act of faith. It's also an act of defiance. You have to have faith to defy. So I don't know the answer. I'm not saying it's faith alone, but I'm saying something different. I'm saying that redemption is really a partnership. It has to come from Hashem, of course, and maybe Hashem does most of it. Maybe Moshe does most of it. The Jewish people are relatively passive, but it is interesting to see that the turning point is nothing happens. There's no vision of the burning bush until the Jewish people cry to Hashem. And it says it was by Yom Rav Mahem. If during those many days, in other words, it was after an event happened, a specific event happened. The king of Egypt dies, and then the Jewish people groan and scream. Whatever that means, we could talk about it when we get there. But the point is, there's a certain event or a certain milestone, which a point in history where the Jewish people cried to Hashem. And right after that, we read about Moshe being dispatched. So I don't want to get into faith. What's the role of faith? Is it do you need faith? Do you not? Is the main thing faith? Is the main thing Hashem's covenant? It's not one or the other, but I would say that I think it's clear. Like I said, I haven't seen anyone say it. Actually, I did see someone said, I think Rabbeinu Bachaye, someone said, a 13th century Kabbalah says, this is, the lesson of this story for us is also the future redemption. Future redemption, you also have to cry to Hashem and ask for the redemption, which is very interesting for Chabad people, because the Rebbe always, not always, always, but especially later in his life, when we were kids, we were growing up, they had this song that somebody composed a song, "We Want Mashiach Now," and the Rebbe would sing, "We Want Mashiach Now," and people pushed back and they said, what does it mean you ask Hashem to bring Mashiach? You have to have faith in Mashiach, and the redemption will come at the right time when Hashem is ready. And the Rebbe was very offended by that notion. He said, open the prayer book 3 times a day in the weekly prayers. All we're doing, not all we're doing, but there's like 3 or 4 times that we ask God to bring us the redemption, right? In other words, you can't just sit and say, oh, redemption will happen when it's ready. You have to call out for it. When you call out for it, that triggers the process. So at least according to that interpretation, saying that this is a lesson for the future, then it's probably telling about the past as well. And that's what we're saying. We're saying redemption needs the human, I would say participation, but it's not really physical participation because they didn't do much. The Jewish people were very passive in the process of redemption, but spiritually, they have to start opening up. And spiritually, they have to start seeking redemption. And the first step of seeking redemption is not so much faith, but it's crying. Because what does crying tell you? Crying tells you that you're not making peace. Crying tells you that this is unnatural. Crying tells you that you believe that this is not the way it should be. You're not making peace with the oppressor. And that's step number 1. So I take your comment and I have to think about it. And I agree that it's not necessarily faith. That's what we're talking about. But I think that at least one way to read it is nothing moves. There's no movement here until the people make a movement. And the Kabbalists like this notion, and it's related to Elul. I can go on a tangent right now. Just going to do it because it's fun. And that is like this, that Elul has many acronyms, the month before the high holidays. And one acronym for Elul is Ani L'Doidi B'Doidi Leap. Many people have it on the Ketubah. I am my beloved, and my beloved is to me. That's a book. That's a reference to the Song of Songs. So when we studied the Song of Songs, we talked about this. Song of Songs has 2 verses that sound similar. One is Elul, Ani L'Doidi B'Doidi Leap. I am my beloved, and my beloved is to me. And one is Doidi Li V'Ani Loi, my beloved is to me and I am to him. And the Kabbalists say there's 2 ways you could interact with Hashem. One is that it begins with the people. Ani L'Doidi, I am my beloved. I reach out to my beloved, and then my beloved responds. Another way is Doidi Li, God responds. Doidi Li, my beloved turns to me, and then I reciprocate. V'Ani Loi. Right? You say you have a couple that have in a relationship. So you're going to say, who should be the one to take the initiative? Who should be the one to decide where we're going on vacation? Who should be the one to decide where we're going for dinner? Who should be the one to call the other one? Who should be the one to apologize first? I always say I'm very happy to apologize as long as the other person apologizes first. No, who should be the one to apologize first? This is a serious question. And the answer is that in a healthy relationship, there's going to be times where you initiate, and you're going to be times where the other person initiates. Because if you initiate all the time, if one person initiates all the time, that's not a relationship. That's like sort of parental. That's top down. That's a hierarchy. That's not a healthy relationship. Healthy relationship is that sometimes you reach out, sometimes the other person does. And this is the way in human relationships, because that's the way it is with Hashem. So says the Medrash, Doidi Li V'Ani Loi, my beloved is to me and I am to him. That's passive. The Jewish people were very passive. Hashem came to them, dispatched Moshe, took the people out of Egypt. Then the Jewish people responded. They came to Sinai. They said, "Okay, we'll buy in. We'll do what we will do, and we will hear." And more or less try to get on board with Hashem, right? But it was initiated by the beloved. It was initiated by Hashem. What's Rosh Hashanah? What's Elul? Elul is what's the holiday of Elul? What do you do on Rosh Hashanah or when you precede Rosh Hashanah? Basically, Rosh Hashanah is Hashem says, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm not calling you. You call me. And that's why the one mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is pick up the phone and call. Okay, they didn't have phones, so pick up the shofar and call to Hashem, right? Because the whole point of Rosh Hashanah is now we're 6 months after Passover. So now it's a different model. Now we turn to Hashem. We initiate. That's Ani L'Doidi. I am my beloved. We initiate. So this is really this really contradicts what I said earlier. Because earlier I was saying that now I'm saying that Passover The story of Egypt is Hashem taking the initiative. Da'idili, my beloved is to me, and I am to him. So generally speaking, that's true. In other words, according to the Kabbalah, there's always, even when I call you, I'm calling you because of what you do for me. So there's always that, it's complicated. Even if one is the dominant one, the other one is always in the background. So yes, the story of the Exodus is the story of Hashem doing the heavy lifting. Hashem is dispatching Moshe, but you're always going to find that the people called Hashem first. And even in the Elul, the Kabbalah explains, yeah, we call to Hashem, but Hashem does things for us. And that's the Kabbalistic metaphor. The king is in the field. That's already beyond the scope of the Chumash. That's for Friday Kabbalah. But the point here is that it's not this would not be inconsistent with the Kabbalah's way of thinking, which is that our relationship with Hashem is not just top down. It's not that Hashem does it, but it's a relationship, and a relationship means the participation of both parties. And therefore, even though there are different times and there's different measures of which one is more dominant and which one does more, but there's always going to be a little bit of both. And here too, you could say, I can't say that the Exodus is a story of people creating the Exodus. No, Hashem creates the Exodus is top down. Hashem comes into Egypt, sends Moshe, 10 plagues, splitting of the sea. The Jewish people are very passive, but a little bit they have to do. And they do that little bit, they do it, that initiates everything. And that awakens the process, and that begins the movement. So I think that's very powerful that we didn't read the verses yet, but nothing happens in chapter 3 before you read verse 23, 24, and 25 on page 301. So we didn't read the verses yet. But go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I believe you made a parallel between people crying to Hashem and he responded, and blowing a shofar. So before even verbalizing, you have to express the feeling that are you saying that you just have to have that feeling that something is not right and you need a redemption? And that's going to come from below. And although it's Exodus, although it's like a Passover scene, but there is a similarity to Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, because the shofar, the question is, if you have a problem, talk to Hashem. Why are you screaming? You have a shofar. Why are you screaming? Talk to Hashem, pray. But the mitzvah is not to pray, the mitzvah is to sound the shofar. So why? So Vicky's touching on a very important point, because on one hand, when a person cannot articulate, it's because they're immature, like a child cries. Baby cries. Why does the baby cry? Because the baby can't speak, so he cries. So in the story of the Exodus, the Jewish people cry to Hashem. Why can't they write a poem? Why can't they write a prayer? Right? Distribute a prayer, right? Just distribute some poetry, because they're not spiritually advanced. So they're crying is sort of, their crying is sort of immature, therefore they can't articulate. But then there's a much deeper form of crying, and that is the reason why you cannot articulate it is because it comes from a place that's deeper than articulation. If something is so deep within you, the pain is so deep, if it hurts a little bit, I could say, I'm not happy. If it hurts a lot, then I cry. Why? Because it comes from a place that's so deep within myself, deeper than articulation. And probably that's what the shofar is, right? The shofar is, we're trying to get to a place that's more raw and more subconscious than just what prayer can articulate. So we daven a lot on Rosh Hashanah. That's trying to articulate the deeper feelings. But the essential mitzvah is to call out, and the calling out comes from the essence of the soul. So it's higher than articulation. So you're getting into deep stuff, because there could be a primitive call that's deep, that's sort of lower than consciousness. It's the person is not conscious, person is not sophisticated, so they can't speak, so they could just cry. Or a person could be sophisticated, but the crying says, I'm coming from a place, I'm speaking to a place that's deeper within myself. And I cannot articulate it because it's more deep within myself.
And unfortunately, it has sometimes comes when you hit rock bottom, like it was in Egypt too, when this slavery was too harsh. So unfortunately, that deep
sometimes they work together. Indeed, sometimes they work together. Indeed. Okay, how do we get here? I have no idea, because I'm not holding it yet. But okay. Oh, we talked about the faith. Yeah, we talked about the faith. That's what we talked about. Faith. Yeah, the Jewish people having faith. So, and we talked about Moshe having faith. Okay, all good stuff. Yeah. So not necessarily, because the act of running away would be the right thing to do, because faith doesn't mean you can put yourself in danger, right? So in other words, you have to act. You can't say God will save me. You have to act and protect yourself. But in a way, the bigger problem is not the running away. The bigger problem is the fear. Also with Jacob, Jacob is afraid. So what does he do? So he prays to Hashem. He sends gifts to Esav. Wonderful thing to do. If you have an older brother, send him gifts. Why not? I'm an older brother. I would like gifts. He also divides his camp into two and prepares for battle. Praying for battle is also good. So Jacob, even according to the opinions that critique Jacob, they critique him not for what he did. What he did the right thing. They critique him for the feeling of fear. So sometimes you have to flee. Yeah, Hashem wants you have to protect yourself naturally. But sometimes you have to flee. But the fear, it would be the problem. So Midian is probably South Jordan. So it's not that far. You're crossing the Sinai Desert, or you're going, yeah, so it's not that far. It's probably a few days walk. Midian is South Jordan. Yeah.
So couldn't you also say that fear is something that you can't control?
Yeah, that's another interpretation. Another interpretation, going back to the story of Jacob, for example, other commentaries say, how could Jacob fear? As if fear is a bad thing. So there's certain commentaries, I forget the name, I think maybe Abravanel says, he says the opposite. 2 minutes left, we'll be down in 2 minutes. He says the opposite. He says that fear is a sign of faith. Person is not fearful is because they're foolish. The fact that you're afraid means you're human. You understand the danger, and you're not a fool, and you're afraid, and yet you continue doing what you, and you don't become paralyzed by the fear, and you do what Jacob does, which is prepare for war and send gifts and be afraid. So some people say that the opposite is true. That fear is a sign of faith, not being afraid. They say, like, what is? Abravanel says, what is someone brave? So the conventional interpretation is brave is someone who doesn't sense fear. Abravanel says, no. Brave is someone who conquers the fear, who has fear, but doesn't let the fear paralyze them. So the same idea is faith. So fear, fear, according to that interpretation, would actually be an act of faith. But other people would say that that fear, could you control your fear? No, but the fear is a result of your worldview. Like, if you really believe that Hashem would protect you, maybe you wouldn't fear. Right?
That's in your mind.
It's in your mind. Correct. But heart is affected by mind. In other words, I'm afraid of something, but I can only be afraid of. The heart is built on certain perceptions, right? A young kid thinks that there's a monster in the closet, so they're afraid. An adult doesn't think there's a monster in the closet, so they're not afraid. It's not we're more brave. We just have a different perception. We understand that the shadow is not a monster, right? So if I see someone scary, right? Well, I'm afraid, but if I know if I understand what the person is and what he's doing, and he's actually, I actually hired him to come here, whatever the case is, I don't think that, I think emotions, even emotions, I think they are affected by perception. So the pushback would be, so one interpretation of Abravanel, fear is a good thing. Fear is a sign you're human. And to the contrary, fear is a sign is that you're a believer. But the other side would be that fear is based on perceptions. And perception is based on, if you therefore thought that Hashem would I'm afraid of something. But if I had, I'm afraid of something. What's an example? I'm afraid that I'm afraid that I got sick. But if I knew that you had the vaccine and you're going to give it to me, so now I'm not afraid, right? So that knowledge, that confidence, is going to affect my fear. So the perception would affect the fear. That's the other side. Two ways of looking at it. I'm not telling you which one to buy into. It's a protective device, but you could say you can protect without the fear, right? Because fear could also be paralyzing. Sometimes people are afraid and make mistakes, and the fear is paralyzing, but also it's distorting. Correct.
Then how you react?
Yeah. Yeah. Also fear, there's different levels. There'll be a healthy fear. Here in the art school, at least they translated frightened, right? And frightened sounds intense fear. So I agree that fear is a way of a great tool that Hashem tells you that there's a problem and therefore protect yourself. But the question is, what do we mean by fear? Fear can mean different things. It's a spectrum of fear. And I think we're more talking about the paralyzing fear. Fear that I'm so frightened, I'm paralyzed, I can't do anything. And that leads me to make mistakes. Either put my head in the ground or make mistakes. But I think the paralyzing fears that we're talking about. And the same things in general, in Hebrew language, you have, for example, anger. The sages talk about anger. What is anger? Well, if you think about it, there's a spectrum of anger, and some are better than others, and some are healthy and some are destructive. Okay, we're running out of quiet time, but go ahead, Vicky, and ask the question. Maybe we have to answer next week because of the noise, but go ahead.
Well, I think it's a short question with the short yes or no question, yes or no answer. The fear there's a fear of Hashem and the fear of other external forces. So Moses feared because did he fear because his prior experience implied that sometimes powerful of this world can achieve something that Hashem wouldn't want to happen, and that's why he feared? Because did he know that all the Jewish boys were supposed to be killed?
Is he afraid? In some sense, fear is the fear of Pharaoh. So in some sense, he's afraid that he's not going to be protected, and that Pharaoh has power over him.
Right. So and that's he
natural.
Was doubting.
That's a doubt. It's logical. It's logical too. And it's logical, and the logical fear, I don't know if there's a problem with the logical fear. I think the problem is with the paralyzing fear. And this is the second interpretation of the Medrash, which says it's logical, yes. But if you had the confidence, then Hashem would protect you in the merit of that confidence. So when we say, when the Chassid came to the Tzemach Tzedek and he said, I have a problem, I think his son wasn't well. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, think good and it will be good. The logical thing to do was to think bad. Right? In other words, even when logically it doesn't pay to think good, if you will have the faith, that will elicit the blessing. Now, thinking good doesn't mean it could also be dangerous. It could also be paralyzed. So I don't have to do anything. That you also have to worry about. That's everything will be fine, and therefore I don't prepare for the future. Right? That's also dangerous. But the point is that if I have the confidence, then I could make the right decisions. Then I could evaluate how big the threat is and how to operate in the face of that threat. But the fear could be paralyzing, and the confidence in that, and confidence doesn't mean, faith doesn't mean I don't have to do anything. In fact, the fact that Moshe ran away from Pharaoh is no one criticizes that. There's no opinion in the Medrash that says Moshe should not have ran away from Pharaoh. The Medrash says that the fear would have been the problem, but not the running away, because running away is a logical thing to do. So even if you have faith, you have to run away.
Yeah, but running away in the sense that you, at the same time, you have to be like Joseph did, be sure that the redemption is here.
Correct. Joseph is a good model. Joseph prepares. Yeah, Joseph's a good model. Yeah.
I would even say in this context, maybe other contexts, it'd be problematic if he wasn't afraid.
Yeah. So you're taking that opinion of the man. Yeah, you're taking the other opinion. Absolutely.
Was Joseph ever afraid?
It doesn't say that he was afraid. No, it doesn't say anything about fear. There is some critique of Moses, the fact that he went and he spoke to the Egyptian. He put his faith in the butler and the minister of Pharaoh, and he said, "You speak to Pharaoh, you get me out of this prison." The Medrash critiques that. And the Medrash says because he put his faith in the Egyptian, that's why he remained in prison for 2 years. That's what the Medrash says, which is a problem because what did he do wrong? You're supposed to try to help yourself naturally. And there's a whole slew of answers because it's a very big question. But I think the best answer is the Medrash says not that the fact that he spoke to the Egyptian, that wasn't the problem. The Medrash says he places his hope in the Egyptian. That's the problem, right? I speak to the Egyptian, do me a favor, try to get me out of prison, but who is my hope? My hope is in Hashem. I know the redemption comes from Hashem. It may come through this Egyptian. So the Medrash does not critique Joseph, at least I think this is the best answer. The Medrash says, so Joseph is never afraid, but there is some critique potentially that he puts his trust in man. Now, I don't think it means that he should not have spoken to the Egyptian or asked him to try to help him, but the trust would be the problem.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi.
I put him in the prison.
Yes. Joseph understood, well, that is faith, that is a big act of faith, when circumstances happen to you, and you realize that it's here, there's actually a purpose, and there's actually something good that will emerge, that's a tremendous act of faith. We're done, you can come. No.
Okay.
We'll stop 5 minutes early, no problem. No problem, we're all good. We're all good, we're great. Thank you, everybody, for joining, thank you.
Thanks, Albert. We have all the